Yes, Shamim Sarif, it's not an easy name. Indian from the background, grown up in South Africa.
Grown up in London, actually. My parents
Your parents were from South Africa. Yes. But you're a novelist, then you were a successful novelist, then you directed your first movie out of your story, I Can't Think Straight.
Yes.
Then the next book was very successful, The Word Unseen.
Yes.
And she made a film out of this too. And she already, that she was the one when I talked to her on the phone asking, how did you manage? I mean, okay, you're a writer, good. How did you dare to just one day say, why shouldn't I be the director of my movie? Why shouldn't I write the screenplay? And she said, well, I mean, I just did it. How did you get the money? Well, we were looking around and we found some private equity money, right? Yeah. From a women's...
Actually, businesswomen.
Businesswomen, who thought this is good.
Believed in the story.
And this to me, and this is, I think, what we can get out of this conference, is to have examples like you that shows that, the boundaries can be pushed way farther than we think. And, just do it. And maybe I introduce you first. What do you think? Yeah, I think I should introduce Patrick first before I ask the question. Patrick Ness is an author from England, born in America. Your father was a drill sergeant.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, I've always have to mention this because when I look at you, but he has nothing at all from a drill sergeant, that's for sure. I met Patrick through Claudia Baumhöfer, who is sitting in the front row. Claudia is the boss of the Hörverlag, the audiobook Verlag, and she told me, please, why don't you read this book as an audiobook? And I said, no, I don't like it. Please read it. I read his story, his last book, called A Monster Call, and I was crying from half of the book on. And I thought, oh my God, what is it? What is it in this story that touches me so deeply? Then I decided I want to meet Patrick, and before meeting I thought, okay, I have another look at this book and see, where it's touching and why it's touching. I started reading it, half of the book. I thought, oh yeah, this is the moment when I started crying the last time, and it was so. And again, and even when I read it, and you were there, Claudia, in the studio, again it touched me, and and I'm so happy you're here. He just got the Carnegie Medal for the last book of his trilogy, Chaos Walking, right? And which is the most prestigious award for young adult literature in England.
Yes.
So congratulations,
Thank
Patrick.
you very much.
And
you didn't have to, but thank you.
So I want to start with you, Shamim. What is it that makes a story so touching, so powerful, that it can change our life, that we might even commit suicide or dress like our hero? What is it about a story that this can happen?
I've just made a mental note to make sure I dress my characters very well from now on. I think it's, we always understand our lives in terms of stories. I think stories have always been a way that we understand and make sense of the world. What makes that powerful, I think, is the emotional power that we have with stories. So this morning, I'm sure many of you were in the Violence Against Women panel. It's one thing for somebody to stand up and say, we have a real problem with sex trafficking, and we can all intellectually understand that and feel for it. But when somebody, of course, stands up and tells you of their experience being trapped in a cage and being abused on a daily basis, it's a whole other world. And I think we were all in tears. We were all completely devastated by the end of it, and we all felt we wanted to do more. That's the emotional power, I think, of an individual story versus an intellectual concept. And I think it's the emotional attachment that's the key. But I think just to take it a step further from that, what I figured out as a film director is that stories let us not only understand our worlds, but create our own worlds as well. Imagination gives us things that we didn't know in our world of possibilities, things that we didn't realize existed. And so people can identify with a character and realize that it is possible for somebody like them to feel a certain way, or to challenge a boundary, or to see the world differently, or their family differently, or their relationship differently. And that's immense power.
You even said, stories can tell us a deeper truth than reality because we engage with them emotionally. What do you think about this?
I completely agree, and I following on everything that Shamim said, I believe is exactly true. And I think the power of a story is that it's personal, that it's, as you said, the experience of the woman this morning. we can relate to, because it's personal. It doesn't feel like anything but a story, and we can put ourselves in that story. I have this theory about writing, and I think that if I ever sit down to write what I call an adjective novel, then I'm sitting, sort of like if I call it a political novel, if I sit down to write a genre novel of some time, I think I'm sitting down to write a mediocre novel because I'm paying attention to the adjective and not to the story. And if I'm paying close enough attention to the story and what's personal in the story for me, and what I'm responding to as a single person, as a single individual person responding to it, then that's what becomes universal. It's the paradox of any story, that the personal becomes universal. And if you try to start out universal, it's a sermon, and nobody wants that.
In your story, A Monster Call, he describes actually a mother who is dying from cancer, and the son, it's about the struggle, being able to let go, whatever. And this is, of course, the moments when they sort of say goodbye. It sounds very pathetic, pathetic is another word, kitschig or whatever. And this is, why I was touched every time so deeply when I read it, was you went so close to the characters. You went so close to this very moment where, on the cutting edge of human being, letting somebody die, and I was wondering, this is nearly too close. And I know that in your book, in your trilogy, you're full into the most cruel and the toughest topics. Is there sometimes a point where you think, I can't go that far? I mean, especially with young adult literature. Yeah. Or do you think we have to go right there where it's the most painful?
I think I get asked the question a lot, particularly some of the content of my teenage books. But my response is, you should see what teenagers write. I mean, are any of you parents of a teenager? Have you read anything they've written lately? I mean, it's harrowing stuff. I've judged teenage writing competitions, and it's all about murder and suicide and abortion and so on and so on. And I always think that if I'm going to write for a teenager, I say, okay, this is what you think about, but let's look at it seriously. Let's look at it truthfully. Let's look at the consequences of it. And I think the power of that stuff, the power of the difficult thing, comes not because it's gratuitously powerful, but hopefully what I'm really, really after is the actual truth of it. And we were talking about this before the event, I think it sounds a little pretentious, but I mean it in a funny way. I think it's the job of any artist to see what is actually there and report the truth. Not what you think's going to be there, not what other people have said was there, not what you hope is there, but what's actually there. And so in a book like A Monster Calls, when his mother, his mother is dying, and that actually happens. And I wanted to avoid all the sentiment of it. I wanted to avoid all of the gooiness of it. That's what I meant. It's not
sentimental.
Yeah, I wanted it to be, what is it really, really like to be 13 years old and effectively alone and maybe losing your mother? What does that really feel like? Because anything else feels like a cheat. It feels like a lie.
He really succeeded it. I mean, you're there next to these two people, and you're like breathless. Your breath is nearly taken away. Shamim, there's I don't know if you remember the TV series Holocaust. It was in the 70s, and I remember that I don't remember because in those days I wasn't nearly born. I wasn't born at all. But I know that there was a big controversy before it came out that people said we cannot, document, tell about the genocide of the Jews in a TV series. This is much too banal, and there's no way, and there was a big discussion about it. So it was a fiction about family vice, most of them dying in the Holocaust. And for the very first time, although there had been brilliant documentaries, Germany was full of, or all over the world, it was full of, material about this period. For the first time, thanks to this TV series, people could emotionally identify with what really happened, with those characters they could see. Would you say that film or TV is the stronger media? Because you are working obviously in both. Which is the more powerful one?
Answer carefully.
Oh, yeah.
Come on, you're going to direct the movie too, Patrick. Come on.
Teasing.
So I think they are equally powerful.
This is the smartness of women. Wonderful.
But very different. So look, we've all read a book where we were in tears, or that stayed with us for days, and we turned around and said to everybody, you have to read this book. But there is something about visual imagery, and I know it's connected to neuroscience, and I'm not even going to go there, But there is that Palmer effect that you talked about, where if you put an image in people's minds, it does arouse an emotion very easily. In the space of a second, it can happen, rather than the space of words built up and built up and built up. And I think that's a very powerful tool. And what I found personally was that when we distributed The World Unseen as a film, it had a different and bigger reaction than the book, especially from countries where women are traditionally repressed. So China, Pakistan, India, parts of Africa. We were getting emails, still get emails almost every day, from women who saw the movie and said, now I feel like I can do something differently, or I have done something differently. And this is what it is. And it was actually very shocking to us both to have that experience, because it really, there was an identification with the character that felt very real.
And it was different to the books, the reaction you got to your book, the same book you made the film
different.
out?
It was different. I think it was more visceral, and maybe also a younger audience. I don't know if that made a difference, but we get a lot of emails from younger women who are feeling trapped within a society that expects them to behave a certain way, or within a culture that has certain expectations, and they don't know how to push out of that. It's very hard, because you don't want to hurt your family. You don't want to be the one to stand up and create trouble for yourself or for anybody else, at the very least. And sometimes they're risking jail or worse. So it's, I think that idea of female role models, and there are fewer in the movies, I think, than in books, traditionally.
So you're concentrating a lot on very powerful
Yes, I
mean
strong men as well, but definitely powerful women. Yeah.
Patrick, what do you think about the difference when you look at your book, the power you have with your book, and the possibility you would have if you bring it up on screen?
I mean, I agree that they're different, and I think they have different strengths, different weaknesses, and I'm not prizing one over the other. I mean, I would say in a book, the magic of a book is a slightly different kind of magic. It's a kind of magic where you fill in the blanks. It's an entirely personal experience, having a book in your hand, reading it, and you're making what they look like in your head, what the characters look like. You're putting yourself in the situation, and it's left in a different way to you, which can have power in different ways. I mean, like in A Monster Calls, how would if you're it's a private thing. The grief is very, very private, and sometimes too private for a 13-year-old. It can be too private because nobody will talk to you about it. So, in a book, you would be able to sit inside his head and feel his feelings in a way that you would have to watch in a film. But there are also different ways of getting an emotion in a film. So I don't want to say one's better than the other.
What do you think, at the end of the day, makes a good story a good story? Is it only the truth of your characters, or do you have a preconceived idea, this is the effect I want to have, this is the audience I want to reach, and this is my job? Or is it something that you just went through and you just feel like I have to write it and it's authentic? Or do you have a concept and say, I think youth should be more aware of what it means to lose your mother?
No, I think if you do that, you're writing a sermon. And you're not writing a book. And who wants to read a sermon? You have to tell a story, and you have to. I always say that I write for an audience of one, which is me. And because I have to react to the story, I have to. If I'm, because I cried when I was writing the sad scenes in A Monster Calls, and that sounds maudlin. It sounds terrible. It sounds really self-indulgent and kind of wanky. That's an English word. But I mean it because if I'm asking my reader to risk this with me, if I'm asking them to feel it, then I need to feel it too, because that's a lie if I'm not. And also if I'm feeling it, if I'm really feeling it, then that power goes down on the page. And that's what I think hopefully makes a good story, which is the truth. And shall I do the violence thing that
the violence?
Yeah, because we were talking a bit about it earlier, and about the exactly why that the violence against women session was powerful. Is that one of my real pet peeves about writing, particularly for teenagers, is how cheap the violence is. The violence is always cheap. It's always A-team violence. It's always, someone gets punched in the face and knocked down, but they're fine a page later. And that.
Well, look at the video games. I mean, it's just about.
It's so cheap, and that if you have any experience of violence in real life at all, that's not even remotely what it's like. Violence cracks the world open. It's horrible and harrowing. And so I teach writing, And this is an exercise I have my students do. So do it with me just really, really quick. So if everybody could think about somebody in their life that they care about, just somebody that you really care for, who are maybe a bit vulnerable. Maybe they're a bit older, a bit younger, maybe they've had a rough time. Somebody in your life that you really care about. Everybody have somebody? Everybody have somebody? Yes, yes, yes. Now write a scene of violence against them. It's awful. It's awful. It's a terrible, terrible experience. And my question to my students is always, why doesn't every scene of violence you write feel like this? Because this is what violence feels like. This is what it really, really feels like. And if you're afraid to write this, then it has power for you. So on the one hand, as a writer, you can take that power and you can put it down on the page and your reader will experience, but also, it's the truth. It's not cheap violence. It's not, shooting a bunch of people, they die, nobody cares. It makes me so angry, that. But it's real violence. It's a real harrowing bit of thing. And I think the same thing is true of grief. I think the same thing is true of joy. It's really, really making it personal for you, what it really feels like. Not what it feels like in books, but what it really feels like. And that's where I think the power of a story comes from, is the truth.
I think this is a wonderful example to really, connect what you're writing to what's really going on. This is excellent. Tell me, Shamim, same question to you, because your films, The Word Unseen and I Can't Think Straight, are very much about women who are under a huge pressure in a situation, either there's apartheid or family traditions and so, and who have to fight both against the social, political situation and as well their personal coming out. Both are stories of women who discover that at the end of the day they fell in love with another woman. Yeah. I mean, your wife is here, Hannah. He's the producer as well. So yes. Basically, I heard it's a little bit your story. Is it like when you started saying this? Is it that you say, I want the people to know about it? I want them to show how difficult it is. I want to teach them how you can break those rules, or do you just write about it because it's sort of a need, and you don't have this, what I was asking you, concept of the effect it should have on your public?
No, I don't have that concept, and I think you're absolutely right, because then you're running into the danger of preaching before you even start. So I think it's definitely always the story that I wanted to tell. But in the course of telling that story, what I really love is challenging the central characters. So they have to undergo these pressures, as you say, and some of them are within their families or their societies, and often politically there's a backdrop in apartheid South Africa for The World Unseen, or in our next movie it'll be Russia, post-Stalin. And for me, those backdrops reflect back even more pressure, and it's how we all react under pressure that defines our characters. And your character, for me, defines your destiny, and how you act and how you grow or don't grow under certain circumstances. So that's the arc that I'm interested in exploring. But because I have an ultimately, I guess, hopeful outlook for humanity, I do enjoy arcs for characters where they are going to learn something by the end, whether they do something with it or not, and they're able to see the world differently, to challenge the perceptions that are around them, and just enjoy and live and love their lives a little bit more as a result. And
by doing that, and by doing exactly that, I think the story becomes everything that you care about politically, becomes everything you care about thematically. And when I write, I find the same thing, that if you pay attention to what you really care about in a story, everything else you love is going to come out.
But it comes authentically. Then it's not didactic.
Right. Exactly. And therefore it's much better to watch, it's much more affecting.
Yes, people are very savvy about that. Now, we all know.
Are we sort of losing the ability to write stories? I mean, maybe less and less the tradition in the families is there to tell fairy tales from a grandma to the grandchild and share myths together. It looks like, after dinner everybody runs to either the laptop or the iPad, and I wonder if they look at fairy tales there. For instance, just fairy tales as an example. Or do you think that this generation, like my kid, that are on Facebook right now, by the way, and
they really are.
Yeah, and they really are. It wasn't a joke. Come home.
You better be looking up my blog.
I mean, and on Facebook, they definitely write more than I ever did in my whole life, because they're writing the whole day, even if it's just cool, dude, wow, whoosh. I mean, it's very short sometimes, but maybe sometimes it's little more than 1 or 2 sentences. So they do write a lot. Do you think that are we going into a culture of many super writers, maybe short stories more, or are we more like losing the ability to really write and to listen to stories that are longer than 45 seconds, which is about the attention span sitting in the front row?
I can say that all I can really address that is from my own experience, which is I talk to schools all the time, and I'll talk to 200 sort of 14-year-olds, and yeah, there's always the ones who don't read, who are only online. But I think, as we talked about it before, I think that there were always those kids who didn't read. There were always those teenagers who didn't read, and still, even with online, with phones, with games, with texting, with everything else, I still get cues of kids who want to argue about my book, who want to ask about the book, who are really excited to meet somebody who's written a book and they want to write a book themselves. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I don't think it's replacing writing and reading. I think it's an addition to, and diminishing it maybe a little. But I from my personal experience of actual teenagers, even in the past month, they're still lining up to read a book.
So you would say our need for stories stayed the same throughout generations, and it's just a matter where you get them,
yeah.
Book or on Kindle or online or whatever. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think so too. I think they remain important, especially in a world where religion is less important. We often look at stories to explain more and more and more about what we're doing here. What's the point? How do we run our own lives? How do we make our lives worthwhile? But I think what you're talking about is definitely an expansion of writing. So now we have blogs, we have Facebook, we have tweets, we have all of that, which expresses something about ourselves. But I don't know if that replaces necessarily fiction or films per se. But it gives everybody the opportunity to express themselves and their ideas more.
Patrick, in your trilogy, the last book just won this medal, you created this character Todd. And Todd is able, like all the men that remain, because women are gone at the very beginning, to hear other men's thoughts. So it's a very noisy word, that you can never sleep because you always hear the thinking. So basically what you do, Jacob, again, sharing your thoughts and where you are and what you do all the time.
You look so happy.
So what is, and they can't hear the women's thoughts. What is it? Why did you want to tell this story?
Well, I mean, the idea of they call it the noise in the book, and it's a world where everybody can hear what everyone is thinking all the time, non-stop. And I think the world is already pretty noisy. I think with mobile phones, with internet, with texting, with networking, and so on. The world is already filled with information. It's filled with people shouting into their mobile phone and forcing you to listen to them, and teenagers in particular, with the texting, their phone just bing, 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 bing. And so the question was, what if you couldn't get away? What if you had no choice? That's just the next step. And particularly, what if you were young and couldn't get away? Because something I say to teenagers when I talk to them, they're 13, 14, 15, and I say, you have less privacy than anyone has ever had in a Western government. They have less privacy than anybody's ever had. And there are consequences to that, because privacy is important. It's where you think the unthinkable so you don't say the unsayable. And in the book, I made it so that it starts out an all-male city, because all of the women have died in a war. But he finds out that he's been lied to, that this hasn't been true. And it turns out that you can't hear the thoughts of women. And I think the thing that we do least successfully as a species is understand difference as mere difference. If something is different, we either build it up, so we resent it, or we think we're better than it, so we can exploit it. And there's never just sort of equality. It's always better or worse, and always under attack. So I wanted to make that as extreme as possible. What if a world existed where you could hear the thoughts of every man and none of the thoughts of any woman? And how would people really react? Again, trying to get the truth of it. Sometimes it'd go well, sometimes it would go horribly badly. I just wanted to just push that idea of difference to its extreme. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot. I'm so sorry.
No. Shamim, do you have anything to say to that? Or you're mostly women out of the business world and managing and, wondering how you can go the next step. And I found this in the Journal of Management Development that says that stories themselves are active players in creating relationships. And these relationships create leadership development opportunities. So as we have many leaders here, you as an excellent storyteller, Shamim, what would you sort of advise would you give for them to improve their ability to tell stories? Should we sit down and exercise, or what is the mean of, you know, for like everybody, not you, excellent writers, what advice could you give?
So don't ever put up a slide which has like a supply chain on it or something like that. It's just not good. Well, it might be in a very technical conference, I don't know, but that's actually real advice, and who am I to say that? You might need to do that, but it's so much more powerful if you can stand up and start with something that you've experienced in the supply chain, which made it extremely compelling and made you do the work that you do, or explain to people why you want them to come and work for Google. Or is there another company here? It's just Google. I love Google.
I guess there are a few other companies here, definitely.
But that's something that we've seen, on panels. We've seen when we've all been at conferences. And I think for me, I have to say, DLDwomen has been. I've been lucky enough to do a lot of festivals and conferences and things over the last few years because of my writing, and this one has been exceptional to me because of the energy around it, because of the stories that women, I think, are naturally telling here in a very personal way. And I think in leadership, it's a great way to lead. If you can relate things to the experiences that you've had, which people behind you are probably very interested to learn from, it's a more emotional way to connect.
What would you like? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
you. I paid her. I don't know who she is.
Good. Apart from being very personal, is there something you could add to how to read, even in a business conversation? Oh, it's done. I'm finished with my head. Add something.
I could do a little song. Well, I think everything Shamim said is brilliant. It's exactly what I would say.
Yep, panel,
exactly right. But I mean, the thing that stories do, the thing that all fiction, good fiction does, film otherwise, is it teaches empathy. It teaches you to put yourself in the place of someone else, and that is the best thing it does. People who don't read novels tend to have less empathy. It's true. Studies about it. And I think if you can make your business personal, make your story personal, you will have empathy for what you want to achieve, and suddenly it's a human goal. Suddenly it's not just a business goal, it's a human goal. And also stories make sense. They make sense. Everyone can follow a story. We're ingrained in us where narrative goes from A to B. So I think absolutely for business, for a story to go from A to B, to get people from A to B, it's a great way to tell a story.
By the way, it's amazing. We were at the conferences of all conferences. It's not DLD. Unfortunately, it's the TED conference, so the one held in Long Beach. Steffi, you remember? And it's a very well-directed conference, I would say. It's nearly like a big theater and 4,000 people looking. And I know they got trained days before they go on stage. And they all start with their personal story. They all start why, they're doing what they're doing and why they're standing here. And you immediately connect with every one of them. It's so simple because it's their personal story. And we are curious beings. And so I think it's really a tremendously important thing, even if you're not into storytelling or acting or one of these unseriösen Berufen, would you say?
Yeah, that's what I say. I don't know what you say, but that's definitely what I say. But the other thing I wanted to say, talking about authenticity and body image and all of these things, which you were talking about earlier, I think the stories that we tell ourselves are the most powerful. And I think that's where, if we can be more aware of what we say to ourselves all the time about ourselves, because often I meet incredible women who are achieving incredible things, doing incredible things, just bringing up kids, which is an incredible achievement by itself. And they don't feel good about themselves in many ways, or they're always very self-deprecating. And if they're British, that's fine, because it's
part of the culture.
Yes, you will not survive otherwise. But seriously, I think if you can retell your own story in a slightly different way and not be afraid to look at yourself differently, that's immense power. Because at the end of the day, life is so precious, and you just want to get through it and enjoy it and make the best of it and just get everything out of it that you can. And to be crippled by uncertainties or insecurities is tragic. And you just kind of want to just think about what you say in your head and maybe say it differently.
Isn't this last question to Patrick. Isn't this a gender difference a little bit too? Because I see it very much with you, my husband, and me, and I see it with many of my girlfriends too. We would have huge problems as women to come back from this conference and say, oh my God, I've been on a panel and I think it was really cool. I mean, they were all there, it was packed, they were all listening. I would never be able to do so, but whenever Hubert comes back from a conference or whatever, he would say, you know, all Munich came together, they all listened, and I think I rocked the house. And I'm always like, oh my God, I envy him. I envy him for this ability. Do you think, Patrick, this is a gender thing or is this just a private thing going on?
I'm so glad you got that one. I'm just singing the end song, that's it.
I can't speak for all men.
She's like, be careful.
I can't speak for all men, and I think this is I think this is an important thing to say, which is I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean, but I'll bet you have lots of female friends who will say you rocked the house. I bet you there are a number of women here. Yes.
Okay.
So you know. So whereas men get, yeah, you did okay. So yeah. So I mean, but also I just.
So what you're saying is we need our girlfriends to say that was great, and you men just don't need it because you come back home.
I need it. I'm very sensitive. Oh yeah, I need it. Yeah. I see. I don't think you can say, and this might be a very unpopular way to end the conference, but I don't think you can say that women are one way and men are another, because I think people are complex. I think everything I write about, there's a boy in my story and there's a girl in my story, and I worked really hard to make sure that it wasn't just the stereotypical thick, brave boy and brainy girl with glasses. You know, it's not all Harry and Hermione, right? I wanted them to be like the boys and girls that I know, who are equally brave and equally foolish and make equal mistakes and do equally amazing things together. And I really worked at that. I really try. My big message to all teenagers in all of my books, just hopefully implicit, is you're complex, and that's okay. You can think contradictory things, and that's all right. That's what being a person is. And so that's, I suppose, what I want to say about men and women, is that equal in all ways, including complexity, is what I would say.
Well, I think this is an excellent last remark from Patrick. I want to thank you very, very much. Shamim, Patrick. Thank you so much for being here.